I am 26 years old, and my husband Tom is 28. We had been married for 3 years when my grandmother passed away. Her death was a quiet, sad thing that left a hole in my heart, but it was also the beginning of a storm I never saw coming. She left me everything. It was a considerable inheritance, enough to change our lives completely. It included her beautiful old house, filled with memories of my childhood, and a sum of money that would allow us to finally be free from the financial struggles that had marked the beginning of our marriage. Tom was thrilled, but his mother, Margaret, was something else entirely. She was a woman who wore her sophistication like armor, her every compliment laced with a subtle barb. She often spoke of her family's history, their supposed old class, which was her way of reminding me that my family, with our more recent and modest success, was not quite up to her standard. The moment she learned the full extent of my inheritance, her behavior shifted from passively critical to actively invasive. She began to treat my inheritance as a family project, one that she was destined to lead. We were having dinner at her house, a weekly ritual I had come to dread. The roast chicken sat between us, a monument to her domestic perfection. "Clara, dear," she began, her voice smooth as silk. "We must be very prudent with this windfall." She said the word windfall as if it were something distasteful, something that had fallen into the wrong hands. Tom shifted uncomfortably beside me. He always did this when his mother started in on me. He would shrink a little, hoping to become invisible. I said, "I have a few ideas, Margaret. I was thinking of speaking with a financial advisor my grandmother recommended." Her smile tightened. "Oh, no, you mustn't do that," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "Those people are vultures. We have a family advisor, Charles. He has handled our family's finances for generations. He understands our needs." I knew what she meant by our needs. She meant her needs. I replied, "Thank you for the suggestion, but I feel more comfortable using someone my grandmother trusted." Margaret's eyes narrowed for a fraction of a second before her pleasant mask slipped back into place. "Of course, dear. It is your money, after all," she said, but the way she said "your" made it sound like a temporary condition. The rest of the dinner was tense. I could feel her disapproval radiating across the table. When we got in the car to go home, Tom let out a long sigh. "You know she was just trying to help, Clara," he said, his eyes on the road. I turned to him, my frustration bubbling over. "No, Tom." She was trying to control it. "It's not her money," I said. He shook his head. "She's from a different generation. She thinks men should handle the finances. It's not personal." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. "It feels very personal," I said quietly. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the conversation in my head. It wasn't just about a financial advisor. It was about ownership. It was about her trying to stake a claim on something that was mine, something my grandmother had wanted me to have. The next few weeks were a relentless campaign of suggestions and veiled demands. Margaret would call me daily. "Clara, I saw a wonderful property for sale. It would be a perfect investment for you and Tom," or, "I spoke with Charles, our advisor. He has a portfolio that would be perfect for you." I told him you'd be calling. Each call was a new pressure point, a new attempt to wear me down. I kept politely, but firmly declining. "Thank you, Margaret, but we are still figuring things out," I would say. Her responses grew colder.
"Fine. Do as you wish.
Just don't come crying to me when you lose it all." Tom was caught in the middle, and his solution was always for me to give in a little. "Just meet with her advisor. What's the harm?" he asked one evening. "It would make her happy." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the exhaustion in his eyes. He loved his mother, but he was also afraid of her. He had spent his entire life trying to please her, and now he expected me to do the same. "The harm, Tom, is that it's not her decision to make. This is my inheritance. My grandmother left it to me," I said, my voice firmer than I intended. He flinched. "I know that," he said defensively. "But we are a family. We should make these decisions together." I felt a chasm opening up between us. He didn't see me as an individual in this. He saw me as an extension of him, and therefore an extension of his mother. The final straw, The one that pushed me from frustrated to deeply suspicious came a month after my grandmother's funeral. I was at her house, the place where I had spent so many happy summers. The air still smelled faintly of her lavender perfume. I was sorting through boxes of old photographs and letters, feeling a mix of grief and nostalgia. I decided to tackle her old writing desk, a beautiful mahogany piece that had always been the centerpiece of her study. Most of the drawers were unlocked, filled with stationery and old pens. But the bottom right drawer was locked. I remembered my grandmother once telling me that was where she kept her important papers. I searched for the key, finding it on an old ring in her jewelry box. With a click, the lock opened. Inside, nestled among neat files of birth certificates and property deeds, was a thick manila envelope. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. It contained her will, the trust documents, and other legal papers. I recognized them from my meeting with her lawyer. But underneath them was another document, one I had never seen before. It was a durable power of attorney. My heart started to pound. I read the text, my eyes scanning the dense legal language. It granted full and immediate power over all of my grandmother's financial and medical affairs to a single agent. My blood ran cold when I saw the name listed as the agent. It was my husband, Tom. I stared at his name, printed in stark black ink. Then I looked at the date. It was signed just 2 weeks before my grandmother was hospitalized for the last time, a time when her mind was already beginning to fade. I looked at her signature at the bottom. It was shaky, jagged, and barely legible. It looked nothing like the elegant, flowing script I knew so well, the script that filled the birthday cards and letters she had sent me my entire life. A wave of nausea washed over me. This felt wrong. Deeply, fundamentally wrong. My grandmother was a proud, independent woman. She would never have signed over control of her life like this unless she was pressured, or worse, unless she didn't fully understand what she was doing. I felt a cold dread creep into my bones. This wasn't just Margaret's meddling anymore. This was something far more sinister. I took out my phone, and my hand was shaking so badly I could barely dial the number. I called Mr. Henderson, my grandmother's longtime lawyer. He was a kind, elderly man who had known her for 40 years. "Mr. Henderson, it's Clara," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I have a question about my grandmother's legal documents." I described the power of attorney form to him. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Clara," he finally said, his voice grave. "I did not draft that document. Your grandmother's will and trust were her final instructions. She never mentioned a power of attorney to me." My heart sank. "It was notarized," I said, reading the name at the bottom. "By someone named George Peterson." Mr. Henderson sighed. "I don't know him," he said. "Clara, if you have concerns about the validity of that document, you need to be very careful." I hung up the phone, the lawyer's words echoing in my ears. "Be very careful." I looked at the document again, at Tom's name and my grandmother's fractured signature. My husband, the man I had promised to love and trust, and his mother, the woman who had been pulling the strings all along. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the core, that they had done this together. The betrayal was so profound it left me breathless. They hadn't just tried to control my inheritance. They had tried to steal it from my grandmother before she was even gone. That evening, I drove home in a daze. The world outside my car window seemed blurry and unreal. All I could see was that forged-looking signature. I walked into our apartment and found Tom on the sofa, watching television. He smiled when he saw me. "Hey, you're back late. How was it at your grandma's?" he asked, his voice light and casual. It was like a punch to the gut. I couldn't look at him. I walked over to the television and turned it off. He looked up, surprised. "What's wrong?" he asked. I held out the power of attorney document. I had made a copy at a print shop on my way home. "What is this, Tom?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He took the paper from me, and his face paled. He stared at it for a long moment, refusing to meet my eyes. It's a power of attorney," he stammered. "Grandma signed it. She wanted me to help her with her finances." I felt a surge of cold anger. She already had a lawyer for that. She had a trust set up. Why would she need this? I asked, my voice growing stronger. He stood up and started pacing. She was getting forgetful. It was just to make things easier, to pay her bills and things, he said, still not looking at me. Her bills were on autopay, Tom. I checked. I shot back. And her signature looks nothing like her real one. Were you there when she signed this? He stopped pacing and finally looked at me. His eyes were filled with a desperate, pleading look. Yes, he admitted. My mother was there too. We were just trying to help. I feel the ground beneath me give way. My husband is lying to my face. Your mother, I said, the name tasting like poison. This was her idea, wasn't it? He ran a hand through his hair, his composure cracking.
She was worried.
She said you were young and didn't know how to handle that much money. She said we needed to protect it for our future. The words hung in the air between us. Protect it? Or control it? You went behind my back, Tom. You took advantage of a sick old woman, I said, my voice breaking. Tears started to stream down my face, hot and angry. That's not what happened, he insisted, his voice rising. She was lucid. She knew what she was signing. I shook my head, the betrayal of physical ache in my chest. I don't believe you, I whispered. I don't think I know who you are anymore. The confrontation ended with him sleeping on the sofa and me locked in our bedroom, the power of attorney document clutched in my hand like a weapon. The trust one had in my husband, the foundation of our entire marriage, had been shattered. I knew then that I couldn't just let this go. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about justice for my grandmother. I had to find out exactly what they had done, and I had to get proof. My grief for my grandmother was now mingled with a cold, hard resolve. Margaret had started a war, and I was going to finish it. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of clarity. The tears were gone, replaced by a steely determination. I couldn't trust my husband, and I certainly couldn't trust his mother. I was on my own. I called my best friend, Sarah. She was a paralegal at a corporate law firm, sharp as a tack and fiercely loyal. We met for coffee at a small cafe far from our usual neighborhood. I laid everything out for her. Margaret's constant meddling, the suspicious power of attorney, Tom's flimsy excuses. She listened intently, her expression growing more serious with every word. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Clara, this is bad, she said, her voice low. A POA signed under duress, or when the person lacks capacity, is invalid. But you have to prove it. I felt a flicker of hope.
How?
I asked. What do I do? Sarah took a sip of her coffee, her brow furrowed in thought. First, you need to find out who this notary, George Peterson, is. A notary is supposed to verify the signer's identity and state of mind. If he's a friend of Margaret's, that's a huge conflict of interest, she continued. Second, you need to talk to anyone who is around your grandmother in her final weeks. Caretakers, neighbors, friends. Anyone who can speak to her mental state. Her advice was like a lifeline. It gave me a plan, a path forward through the mess of my emotions. And what about Tom? I asked, the question heavy with pain. Sarah's gaze softened. You need to decide what you want from him. But for now, don't let him know what you're doing. Act normal. You need the element of surprise. I left the cafe feeling armed. I had a mission. My first stop was to look up George Peterson, the notary. A quick online search revealed he ran a small public notary service out of a tiny office in a strip mall on the other side of town. I decided to pay him a visit. I dressed in a simple blouse and slacks, trying to look as non-threatening as possible. I rehearsed a story in my head. I found his office sandwiched between a nail salon and a laundromat. The inside was cramped and smelled of stale coffee. A balding man in a rumpled shirt sat behind a large metal desk. Can I help you? He asked, not looking up from his newspaper. Are you George Peterson? I asked. He grunted in affirmation. My name is Clara. I was hoping you could help me. My grandmother recently passed away, and I'm trying to sort out her paperwork. I have a document here that you notarized for her, I said, pulling a copy of the POA from my purse. I watched his face carefully as he took the paper. His eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite read. Recognition? Nerves? He cleared his throat. I notarize a lot of documents, miss. I can't remember every single one, he said, his tone dismissive. I pointed to the date. It was only a few weeks ago. An elderly woman, Margaret, and Tom were with her, I said, deliberately dropping their names. His composure slipped. He shifted in his chair and adjusted his tie.
Ah, yes.
I think I remember. A lovely family, he said, his voice a little too cheerful. My eyes scanned his messy desk, and then I saw it. Tucked into the corner of a corkboard behind him, almost hidden by a calendar, was a photograph. It was a picture of him and another person, smiling at a golf course. The other person was Margaret. They looked comfortable, like old friends. My heart hammered in my chest. This was it. The conflict of interest Sarah had talked about. You seem to be good friends with Margaret, I said, my voice casual as I gestured towards a photo. He followed my gaze, and his face flushed. He quickly tried to cover. Oh, her? We're just acquaintances. Members of the same country club, he stammered. I knew he was lying. I had my first piece of the puzzle. I thanked him for his time and left, my mind racing. He was compromised. He had a personal relationship with the woman who stood to benefit from this document. My next step was to talk to Maria, my grandmother's caretaker. Maria had been with her for the last 2 years of her life. She was a gentle, compassionate woman who had genuinely cared for my grandmother. I found her at her small apartment, and she welcomed me with a warm hug. We sat at her kitchen table, and I asked her about my grandmother's final weeks. She had good days and bad days, you know, Maria said, her eyes sad. Some days she was so sharp, telling me stories about when you were a little girl. Other days she was very confused. She would forget where she was. I leaned forward, my voice soft. Maria, do you remember a day when my husband, Tom, and his mother came to visit with another man? A man in a suit, maybe carrying a briefcase? Maria's brow furrowed in concentration. Then her eyes widened. Yes, I remember that day, she said. Your grandmother was having a bad day. She was very agitated. They went into the study with her and closed the door. I could hear Margaret's voice, loud and insistent, my breath caught in my throat. What happened after they left? I asked. Maria shook her head slowly. Your grandmother was very upset. She was crying. She kept saying, they made me sign it. I didn't want to sign it. I tried to calm her down, but she wouldn't tell me what it was. She just seemed so scared. The words hit me like a physical blow. They made me sign it. This was the testimony I needed. My grandmother had been coerced. I asked Maria if she would be willing to write down what she remembered and sign it. She agreed, without hesitation. Your grandmother was a good woman, she said. What they did was wrong. I left Maria's apartment with a signed statement in my purse and a fire in my belly. The pieces were coming together. But I still needed something more concrete, something undeniable. I needed to know what they had done with the power of attorney. I needed to follow the money. That night, I did something I never thought I'd do. I waited until Tom was asleep, his breathing deep and even. I quietly slipped out of bed and went to his office. His laptop was on his desk. My hands were shaking as I opened it. I knew his password. We had always shared everything. Or so I had thought. My heart pounded as I navigated to his online banking portal. He had several accounts, our joint checking, his personal savings. And then I saw it. A new account I didn't recognize. It was a joint savings account, opened just a few days after the power of attorney was signed. The account holders were listed as Tom and Margaret. I clicked on it, my stomach churning with dread. The transaction history loaded, and my world tilted on its axis. There was only one deposit. A single, massive transfer of $200,000. The transfer was from my grandmother's savings account. The date was the day after the POA was notarized. They hadn't waited a moment. They had started draining her accounts immediately. I scrolled down, my eyes scanning the withdrawals. There were dozens of them. A $50,000 payment to a high-end credit card company. A $10,000 charge at a luxury resort. a $20,000 payment to a car dealership. None of these were my grandmother's expenses. They were Margaret's. She had used my grandmother's life savings, my inheritance, as her personal slush fund. She was paying off her debts, funding her lavish lifestyle. I felt a wave of pure, unadulterated rage. I took out my phone and took pictures of every single transaction, every detail. This was it. This was the proof. This was the weapon I would use to burn her world to the ground. I closed the laptop and crept back to bed, but I didn't sleep. I lay there in the dark, next to the man who had betrayed me, and I planned. I planned my revenge. The time for quiet investigation was over. It was time to escalate. Armed with the bank statements from the secret account, I knew my next confrontation with Tom had to be different. I couldn't afford to let him wriggle away with vague excuses and half-truths again. I needed to corner him, to force him to see the undeniable proof of his and his mother's deception. I waited until the weekend, a Saturday morning when we were both home with nowhere to run. I found him in the kitchen, making coffee, acting as if the chasm between us didn't exist. "Morning," he said, offering me a mug. I ignored it. I walked over to the kitchen table and laid out the printed bank statements, the incriminating transactions highlighted in yellow. "I want you to explain this," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. He glanced at the papers and his face went ashen. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. "This is a joint account in your name and your mother's name, isn't it?" I pressed. He nodded, his eyes fixed on the statements. "And this $200,000 deposit," I continued, pointing to the first line item. "That came from my grandmother's account, didn't it? The day after you had her sign that power of attorney." He finally looked up at me, his eyes wide with panic. "Clara, it's not what you think," he pleaded. "My mom said it was to protect the assets. She said putting it in a separate account would shield it from inheritance taxes or something. I didn't know she was spending it." I let out a short, bitter laugh. "You didn't know? You're a joint owner of the account, Tom. Did you never once look at a statement? Did you not wonder where the money was going?" His face crumpled. "I trusted her," he whispered. "She's my mother. She told me she was investing it for us, for our future. She said it would be a surprise." I felt a flicker of something that might have been pity, but I stamped it out. His willful ignorance was not an excuse. It was a choice. He chose to trust his manipulative mother over his own wife and the well-being of my grandmother.
A surprise?
A $50,000 payment on her personal credit card?
A $10,000 spa vacation.
A down payment on a new luxury car? Those were her investments, Tom. She was paying off her secret debts with my inheritance, I said, my voice rising with every word. The truth of it, said aloud, was even more disgusting. He sank into a chair, his head in his hands. "I didn't know," he mumbled into his palms. "I swear, I didn't know she was in debt." This was the moment of truth. I needed to know if there was anything left of the man I married, or if he was completely lost to his mother's influence. "I'm going to give you one chance, and only one," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You are going to help me get every single penny back. You're going to tell me everything you know about her plans, about her debts, about why she did this. Or I take these papers, along with Maria's statement about my grandmother being coerced, and I go to the police. I will file charges against both of you for fraud and elder abuse." The threat hung in the air, heavy and absolute. I watched as a war raged within him. The fear of legal consequences, the shame of his betrayal, the lifelong habit of protecting his mother. He looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed. "Okay," he said, his voice cracking. "Okay, I'll help you." He finally started talking, and the story that tumbled out was even worse than I had imagined. Margaret was drowning in debt. She had been living far beyond her means for years, maintaining the illusion of old class on a mountain of credit. Her husband, Tom's father, had left her with less than she expected, and she had been secretly hemorrhaging money ever since. My inheritance wasn't just a windfall to her. It was a lifeline. She saw it as her personal bailout fund. Tom admitted that she had been pressuring him for months, complaining about her financial worries, making him feel guilty and responsible for her happiness. The power of attorney was her master plan. She had convinced Tom it was a necessary step to manage the estate, all the while intending to siphon off funds for herself. As Tom confessed, a new layer of the betrayal was revealed. Margaret hadn't just been stealing money. She had been actively trying to turn people against me. "She's been calling my aunt and uncle," Tom admitted, his voice full of shame. "She told them you were being greedy, that you were trying to lock me out of the inheritance. She said you were ungrateful for all her help." I felt sick. While I was grieving for my grandmother, she was poisoning my name within the family, painting me as the villain to cover her own crimes. It was a calculated, cruel campaign to isolate me. My resolve hardened into something unbreakable. This wasn't just about getting my money back anymore. It was about exposing Margaret for the predator she was. It was about taking back my name and my dignity. My next move was to speak with Tom's sister, Lisa. Lisa had always tried to stay neutral in the family's low-grade conflicts. She loved her mother, but wasn't blind to her flaws. I knew that if I could get Lisa on my side, it would be a significant blow to Margaret's credibility. I met Lisa for lunch, choosing a quiet restaurant where we could talk privately. She was wary at first. "Tom said you two are having a hard time," she said, picking at her salad. "He said it's about the inheritance." I took a deep breath. "It is," I said. "But it's not what your mother has been telling you." I calmly explained the situation, starting with the power of attorney and ending with the secret bank account. I didn't show her the statements right away. I wanted to see her reaction first. She listened, her expression unreadable. "Mom can be controlling," she said slowly. "But stealing? That seems extreme." I knew this was my moment. I reached into my bag and pulled out the copies of the bank statements. I pushed them across the table. "See for yourself, Lisa," I said. She picked up the papers, and her eyes scanned the pages. I watched as her skepticism melted away, replaced by dawning horror. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. This is her credit card." I recognized the last 4 digits. "And this resort," she told us a friend treated her to a trip. The lies were unraveling right before her eyes. She looked up at me, her own eyes filled with tears. "I can't believe she would do this," she said, her voice trembling. "To your grandmother, to you." I had her. I had broken through the wall of family loyalty. "She's been telling everyone that I'm the greedy one," I said softly. "She's trying to isolate me so no one will believe me when the truth comes out." Lisa shook her head, her anger now directed at her mother. "No," she said, her voice firm. "She's not going to get away with this. I'm with you, Clara." Leaving that lunch, I felt a shift in the power dynamic. I was no longer alone. I had an ally within the family, but I still needed more. I needed someone with authority, someone Margaret couldn't dismiss or intimidate. I thought of Tom's uncle, Robert. He was Tom's father's brother, a stern, no-nonsense businessman who had never been particularly fond of Margaret. He had always seen through her airs and graces. Tom had told me that Robert and Margaret had a falling out years ago over his brother's will, with Robert believing Margaret had manipulated the situation to her advantage. He was the perfect person to approach. I called him and asked if I could meet with him. He sounded surprised but agreed. I went to his office the next day, my heart pounding with a mixture of hope and fear. If he didn't believe me, Margaret's position would be stronger than ever. I sat across from him in his large, imposing office. I laid out the entire story, just as I had with Lisa, but this time I brought everything: the copy of the POA, Maria's signed affidavit, and the bank statements. Robert listened in stony silence, his face an unreadable mask. He examined each document with meticulous care. He spent a long time looking at the bank statements, his lips pressed into a thin, hard line. When he was done, he stacked the papers neatly and looked me straight in the eye. "I always knew she was a viper," he said, his voice a low growl. "She did the same thing to my brother, convincing him to cut me out of a business deal we had planned for years. She is a parasite who attaches herself to anyone with money." A wave of relief washed over me.
He believed me.
Not only did he believe me, but he despised her as much as I did. She has painted you into a corner, young lady, he said, his tone softening slightly. She is counting on you being too afraid or too decent to fight back in a way that would cause a public family scandal, I nodded. That's what I'm afraid of, I admitted. I don't want to destroy the family. Robert leaned forward, his eyes glinting with a cold fire. Sometimes a part of the family is so rotten it needs to be cut out to save the rest, he said. You have the proof. You have the leverage. Now you need to decide how you want to use it. Do you want to go to the police, or do you want to handle this internally? I thought for a moment. Going to the police would be messy and public. It would mean a trial, and Tom could be implicated. I didn't want to protect him, but I wasn't sure I wanted to see him in jail either. What I wanted was justice, and for Margaret, justice meant something more than a prison sentence. It meant losing the one thing she cared about most: her status, her reputation, her precious image as the perfect family matriarch. I want to handle it internally, I said, my voice firm. I want her to face the family she has lied to. I want her to be publicly shamed. Robert smiled, a grim, approving smile. Good, he said. Then let's plan a party. The plan was simple, and it was brutal. Margaret was hosting her annual family dinner party the following Saturday. It was her signature event, a chance for her to showcase her perfect home, her gourmet cooking, and her position as the head of the family. Uncle Robert suggested it was the perfect stage for our confrontation. She will be in her element, surrounded by the people whose opinions she values most, he had said. When we expose her there, she will have nowhere to hide. The week leading up to the dinner was the longest of my life. I lived in a state of suspended animation, going through the motions of my life while a storm brewed inside me. Tom was a ghost in our apartment. He was terrified, alternating between apologizing profusely and sinking into a silent, shame-filled despair. He knew what was coming. He knew he would have to face his mother and finally choose a side, unequivocally, in front of everyone. I felt no sympathy for him. This was the mess he had helped create. On the night of the dinner, I got dressed with methodical care. I chose a simple, elegant black dress. I wanted to look composed, serious, and unshakable. When I walked into the living room, Tom was already waiting, dressed in a suit that looked 2 sizes too big for him. He looked like a child playing dress-up. "Are you ready?" I asked, my voice calm. He just nodded, unable to speak. The drive to his mother's house was silent. The air in the car was thick with unspoken fears. I could feel the tremors in his hands as he gripped the steering wheel. I, on the other hand, felt a strange, cold calm settle over me. The fear was gone, replaced by a righteous certainty. I was not the one who should be afraid. We walked into Margaret's house, and she greeted us at the door with a brilliant, false smile. "Clara."
Tom.
"You're here," she chirped, kissing the air next to our cheeks. She was wearing a garish silk hostess gown and far too much jewelry. She looked like a queen holding court in her castle. The living room was already filled with family members, Tom's aunts, uncles, and cousins. Lisa was there, standing by the fireplace. She caught my eye and gave me a small, nervous nod. Uncle Robert was talking to another cousin, a tumbler of whiskey in his hand. He saw us, and his expression hardened with purpose. He was ready. Margaret fluttered around the room, laughing too loudly, playing the part of the gracious matriarch to perfection. She made a point of coming over to me and placing a hand on my arm. "Clara, dear, you look a little pale," she said, her voice dripping with feigned concern. "I do hope all this stress with the estate isn't getting to you. You must let us help you, this is it. The moment is here." Her condescension is the spark that lights the fuse. I looked her directly in the eye. "Actually, Margaret, the stress isn't from the estate," I said, my voice clear and carrying across the suddenly quiet room. "It's from what you've done with it." Her smile froze on her face. The hand on my arm tightened like a claw. "I don't know what you mean, dear," she said, her voice a tight whisper. Everyone in the room had stopped talking. All eyes were on us. "I think you do," I said, pulling my arm away from her grasp. "We need to talk about my grandmother's money." "The money you stole." A collective gasp went through the room. Margaret's face, which had been pale, now turned a blotchy, furious red. "How dare you?" she hissed. "How dare you come into my home and make such vile accusations?" She turned to Tom, her eyes blazing. "Tom, are you going to let her speak to me this way?" Tom stood frozen, his face a mask of misery. He looked from his mother to me, trapped. "He knows it's true," I said, my voice ringing with confidence. "He helped you do it." I walked over to the large mahogany dining table, the centerpiece of her perfect room, and I opened the portfolio I had brought with me. I took out the documents one by one and laid them on the polished wood. The power of attorney. Maria's signed statement. And the bank statements, with her extravagant purchases highlighted in bright yellow. "This is a power of attorney you had my sick, confused grandmother sign, notarized by her friend from the country club." I began, my voice steady and strong. "This is a statement from her caretaker, Maria, who heard my grandmother crying after you left, saying you made her sign it." Margaret started to sputter. "This is absurd. She's lying." That woman was always after more money, but no one was listening to her. They were all staring at the papers on the table. Then I picked up the bank statements. "And this," I said, holding up the pages, "is where you spent her money. $50,000 on your credit card. $10,000 on a vacation. $20,000 for your new car. You told everyone you were protecting my inheritance. You were protecting it right into your own pocket." The silence in the room was deafening. It was broken by Uncle Robert's voice, cold as ice. "Is this true, Margaret?" he demanded. Margaret's eyes darted around the room, looking for an ally, for someone to defend her. She found no one. Everyone was looking at her with a mixture of shock and disgust. Her carefully constructed world was crumbling around her. She tried one last desperate gambit. She pointed a trembling finger at her son. "Tom," she shrieked, "you told me this was okay. You managed the account with me. This is your fault as much as mine." All eyes turned to Tom. This was his moment of reckoning. He could side with his mother and go down with her, or he could finally tell the truth. He looked at her, at the woman who had controlled his entire life, and something inside him finally broke. "No, Mom," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "That's not what happened. You told me it was an investment for Clara and me. You told me you were handling it. You lied to me. You lied to everyone." The final betrayal, from her own son, seemed to suck the air from Margaret's lungs. She stared at him, her mouth agape. Then Lisa stepped forward, her face streaked with tears. "Mom, how could you?" she sobbed. "After everything Clara has been through, how could you be so cruel?" The dam broke. Margaret let out a guttural scream of pure rage. "You're all against me," she shrieked, her voice raw and ugly. "After everything I've done for this family. And you," she snarled, her venomous gaze landing on me, "you little gold-digging snake. You came into this family and ruined everything." I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I watched her melt down, her perfect mask shattered, revealing the grasping, desperate woman underneath. My heart is pounding, but my voice is steady. I am not shaking. I watch as the power drains from her face. She knows she is beaten. When her tirade finally subsided into ragged gasps, I spoke into the silence. "It's over, Margaret," I said calmly. "Here is what is going to happen. You're going to transfer every single penny that you took, plus interest, into an account that I control by Friday at noon. You are also going to sign a legally binding document, which Uncle Robert's lawyer will draft, admitting to what you did and relinquishing any and all contact with me and my inheritance forever. You will stay out of our lives." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. "If you refuse, or if $1 is missing, this entire portfolio, along with testimony from Tom, Lisa, and Uncle Robert, goes directly to the district attorney's office on Monday morning. And we will all watch as you trade this beautiful house for a jail cell. The choice is yours." She stared at me, her eyes filled with a hatred so pure it was terrifying. But beneath the hate, I saw something else: defeat. Complete and utter defeat. She had lost. She had lost everything. The aftermath of that night was like the quiet that follows a devastating storm. The family was fractured, the pieces scattered. Margaret, stripped of her power and her reputation, became a ghost. True to my word, Uncle Robert's lawyer drafted a confession and a repayment agreement. She signed it without a word. The money, every last cent, was transferred into a new account in my name only by the deadline. To pay it back, she had to sell her precious new car. She had to cash in her investments. And, in the ultimate humiliation, she had to sell the house where she had held court for so many years, the very stage of her downfall. She moved into a small, soulless condominium on the other side of town. The family she had worked so hard to control now wanted nothing to do with her. The phone calls stopped. The invitations dried up. She was left alone with the consequences of her own greed. I had a conversation with Lisa a few weeks later. We met for coffee, and she looked tired but relieved. I haven't spoken to her since that night, she told me. She's tried to call, leaving these long, rambling messages about how she was the victim. I can't even listen to them. She looked at me, her eyes full of a sad sort of gratitude. Thank you, Clara, she said. I know it was horrible, but you freed us. We've all been living under her thumb for so long, we didn't even realize it. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you from the beginning. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. You did when it counted, I said. That's all that matters. Our relationship, once strained and distant, was now based on a new, solid ground of mutual respect. My conversation with Uncle Robert was different. He called me to his office to go over the final paperwork. He was all business, but there was a deep satisfaction in his eyes. She got what she deserved, he said, handing me a folder. It took someone with your courage to finally put her in her place. He then offered me the name of a new financial advisor, a woman he described as a shark, but a shark who will be on your side. He helped me set up a new trust, ironclad and untouchable, ensuring that my grandmother's legacy would be protected forever. He had become an unexpected and invaluable ally, a pillar of strength when I had needed one most. The most difficult fallout, of course, was with Tom. Our marriage was in ruins. The trust, once broken, was not easily repaired. He moved out for a while, giving me the space I needed. He started going to therapy, both on his own and eventually with me. The sessions were raw and painful. He had to confront a lifetime of emotional manipulation by his mother. He had to face the weakness in himself that allowed him to be complicit in her scheme. I was a coward, he admitted in one session, his voice thick with self-loathing. I was so afraid of disappointing her that I was willing to disappoint you. I failed you, Clara. And I failed your grandmother. I don't know if you can ever forgive me for that. I didn't have an easy answer for him. Forgiveness felt like a distant shore I couldn't yet see. I took the inheritance, my inheritance, and I made a new life for myself. I sold my grandmother's house, as it held too many painful memories of the betrayal. With the money, I bought a small, beautiful house for myself, in my name only. I used a portion of the funds to start my own business, a small online bookstore specializing in classic literature, a passion I had shared with my grandmother. It thrived. I found a new sense of purpose and independence that I had never known before. I was no longer just Tom's wife or Margaret's daughter-in-law. I was Clara, and I was strong. Tom and I are still working on it. The road back is long and uncertain. He is trying, truly trying, to become the man I thought he was, the man he should have been. He has cut off all contact with his mother. He is building a new spine, one that isn't made of fear and obligation. Some days, I see glimpses of the husband I fell in love with, and I feel a flicker of hope. Other days, the memory of his betrayal is a cold wall between us. We are taking it one day at a time. The new boundary is clear. My life, my finances, and my decisions are my own. He can be a partner in that life, or he can be a visitor. The choice is his. A few months ago, I saw Margaret. I was in a grocery store in a part of town I rarely visit. I turned a corner into the dairy aisle, and there she was. She looked small. The expensive clothes were gone, replaced by a drab tracksuit. Her hair was unkempt, and her face was bare of its usual mask of makeup. She looked older, tired, and utterly defeated. She was staring at the price of a carton of milk, a look of worry on her face. Our eyes met for a brief second. I saw a flash of her old hatred, but it was quickly replaced by something else. Shame. She quickly looked away, grabbed the cheapest brand of milk, and practically fled down the aisle, away from me. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel pity. I just felt a cold, quiet finality. I had learned a valuable lesson through all of this. I had stopped giving warnings to people who refused to respect my boundaries. She had finally learned her own lesson, the one she had tried so hard to teach me in reverse. She finally learned what it feels like to be powerless. And in her downfall, I had finally found my freedom.